The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Copper Creek Station as the westbound train wheezed to a stop, steam hissing from its iron belly like an exhausted beast. Among the handful of passengers who stepped down onto the weathered planks was a young woman whose emerald dress stood out like a jewel against the browns and grays of the frontier town. Clara Whitmore clutched her carpetbag with white knuckles, her chin raised in defiance even as her heart thundered with uncertainty. She had traveled over 1,000 miles from Philadelphia, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride that had seemed like her only escape from a life of servitude to her cruel stepfather. The letter from rancher Jake Morrison had been brief but promising. He needed a wife to help run his homestead, and she needed a new beginning. What she hadn't expected was the cold knot of fear that now twisted in her stomach as she faced the reality of marrying a complete stranger. Before I continue with Clara's story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to us. And I'm always curious to know where our amazing listeners are tuning in from around the globe. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, approached her with a knowing look. "You'd be the bride for Jake Morrison, I reckon," he said, tipping his hat. "He's waiting for you over at the saloon. Said to tell you he's the tall one in the black hat." Clara's mouth went dry. She had imagined meeting her future husband in a more civilized setting. But this was the frontier, she reminded herself. Different rules applied here. The Silver Dollar Saloon was exactly what she had feared. A dimly lit establishment that reeked of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. Piano music tinkled from a corner where a woman in a faded red dress played with mechanical precision. Clara hesitated at the bat-wing doors, her proper upbringing warring with her desperate circumstances. She had come too far to turn back now. Jake Morrison sat at a corner table, his broad shoulders filling out a worn leather vest, his dark hair touching the collar of his white shirt. Even seated, Clara could tell he was tall, and the black Stetson resting on the table beside his whiskey glass confirmed the station master's description. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. When he looked up and their eyes met across the smoky room, Clara felt something electric pass between them, and it terrified her more than anything else about this entire arrangement. "Miss Whitmore," he said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of years spent under the western sky. "I'm Jake Morrison. Welcome to Copper Creek." He didn't smile, didn't offer any of the pleasantries she might have expected. Instead, he studied her with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Mr. Morrison," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I trust the arrangements are still satisfactory?" The question hung between them like smoke from the oil lamps overhead. She needed to know that he still intended to honor their agreement, even though she could see the doubt flickering in his expression as he took in her appearance. "You're not what I expected," he said bluntly, and Clara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. "The letters made you sound more practical, less—" He gestured vaguely at her emerald dress, her carefully arranged hair, her soft hands that had never known real work. "Less what, Mr. Morrison?" Clara's voice carried a sharp edge that made several nearby patrons glance in their direction. "Less refined? Less educated? Less capable of being the wife you ordered like a piece of farm equipment?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them, fueled by weeks of anxiety and the humiliation of being inspected like livestock. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly, and for the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his features. Less likely to survive a month out here, he finished quietly. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Whitmore. Life on a ranch is hard, harder than anything you've probably ever faced. I need a partner, not a decoration. The insult hit Clara like a physical blow, but instead of crumbling, she felt her spine straighten with righteous fury. You don't know anything about what I've faced, Mr. Morrison, and you certainly don't know what I'm capable of surviving. She took a step closer to him, close enough to smell the leather and sage scent that clung to his clothes. But if you're having second thoughts about our arrangement, perhaps we should discuss the matter of my return passage to Philadelphia. Now hold on, Jake said, his own temper beginning to show. I didn't say I was backing out. I just think we should be clear about what we're both getting into here. He picked up his hat and settled it on his head with deliberate slowness. The preacher's waiting at the church. We can get this done and head out to the ranch before dark. Or you can take the next train east. Your choice. Clara stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Behind her lay a life of servitude and abuse under her stepfather's roof. Ahead lay the unknown, tied to a man who clearly saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. But there was something in Jake's eyes, beneath the skepticism and frustration, that gave her pause. A loneliness that matched her own, perhaps. A need that went deeper than his practical words suggested. Very well, she said finally, lifting her chin in a gesture that was becoming familiar. But I have one condition, Mr. Morrison. Jake waited, his expression guarded. If you kiss me, I'll run. I won't be treated like property to be claimed with a kiss and a signature. If we're to be married, it will be a partnership of equals, or it will be nothing at all. The saloon had grown quiet around them, the other patrons sensing the drama unfolding at the corner table. Jake studied Clara's face for what felt like an eternity, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the fire in her green eyes, the way she held herself like a queen despite being completely out of her element. Then, to her complete surprise, he smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and infinitely more approachable. Fair enough, Miss Whitmore, he said, extending his arm to her. Shall we go get married? The walk to the church was conducted in tense silence, Clara's hand resting lightly on Jake's arm as they navigated the dusty streets of Copper Creek. The town was smaller than she had imagined, with a handful of businesses clustered around the main thoroughfare and modest homes scattered beyond. It was rough and unfinished, but there was something honest about it that appealed to her, despite her nervousness. The church was a simple wooden structure with a bell tower that reached toward the endless blue sky. Reverend Matthews, a kindly man with silver hair and gentle eyes, was waiting for them with his Bible already open. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with the Reverend's wife and the town doctor serving as witnesses. When it came time for the traditional kiss, Jake caught Clara's eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, honoring her earlier demand. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Matthews declared, closing his Bible with a satisfied smile. May God bless your union and grant you happiness in the years to come. Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment as Jake simply nodded his thanks and turned toward the door. The ride to the Morrison Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Clara had ever seen. Rolling hills covered in golden grass stretched to the horizon, broken by stands of cottonwood trees and the occasional rocky outcropping. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, their lowing carried on the warm afternoon breeze. Despite her anxiety about her new situation, Clara found herself genuinely moved by the raw beauty of the landscape. "It's magnificent," she said softly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving town. Jake glanced at her, surprised by the genuine wonder in her voice. "It can be," he agreed. "It can also be brutal. Drought, floods, blizzards, Indian raids. This land doesn't forgive mistakes." He paused, then added, more quietly, "My first wife learned that the hard way." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. "Your first wife?" she asked carefully. Jake's hands tightened on the reins, and she could see the pain that flickered across his features. "Sarah," he said simply. "She died 3 years ago. Fever took her during a particularly hard winter. She was... And then he stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. She was everything this place needed. Strong, capable, born to ranch life. When she died, I thought I'd never find anyone who could fill her place." The implication hung heavy between them, that Clara was a poor substitute for his beloved Sarah, a desperate attempt to fill a void that could never truly be filled. Clara felt her heart sink, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "It must have been very difficult." "It was," Jake admitted. "Still is, some days. But life goes on, and a ranch this size needs a woman's touch. That's why I placed the advertisement." His honesty was brutal, but somehow appreciated. At least he wasn't pretending this was a love match. The Morrison Ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill, and Clara couldn't help but gasp at the sight. It was larger than she had expected, a 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and various sheds. It was clearly a prosperous operation, well-maintained and efficiently organized. "It's beautiful," Clara said, and meant it. Jake looked pleased despite himself. "Sarah designed most of it," he said. "She had good instincts for what would work out here." There it was again, the ghost of his first wife, hovering between them like an unwelcome chaperone. Clara wondered if she would ever be able to step out of Sarah's shadow, or if she was doomed to be compared to a memory for the rest of her life. As they pulled up to the house, several ranch hands emerged from the barn to help with the horses and Clara's luggage. They were a rough-looking bunch, but they tipped their hats respectfully and called her ma'am with genuine courtesy. Jake introduced them briefly: Tom, the foreman, Miguel, who handled the horses, and young Billy, who couldn't have been more than 16 and blushed furiously when Clara smiled at him. The inside of the house was as impressive as the exterior, with solid furniture and beautiful details that spoke of both comfort and practicality. But Clara couldn't help noticing the feminine touches that were clearly Sarah's work: embroidered curtains, delicate china displayed in a corner cabinet, a quilt draped over the back of the sofa that showed hours of careful stitching. "Your room is upstairs," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "Second door on the right. I'll have Tom bring up your things." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken message. They might be married, but this would not be a true marriage in every sense, at least not yet. That evening, Clara joined Jake for dinner in the large kitchen, a meal prepared by Miguel's wife, Rosa, who lived in a small house near the bunkhouse. The food was simple but delicious: beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables from Rosa's garden. The conversation was stilted, both of them struggling to find common ground. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said finally, desperate to break the uncomfortable silence. "How long have you been here?" "Built it from nothing about 8 years ago," Jake replied, seeming more comfortable with this topic. "Started with just a few head of cattle and a lot of hope. Now we're running about 2,000 head, with plans to expand next spring." There was pride in his voice, and Clara could see why. Building something like this from scratch would have taken incredible determination and skill. "What would you like me to do?" she asked. "I mean, what are my responsibilities here?" Jake looked surprised by the question, as if he hadn't really thought about the practical aspects of having a wife. "Well, Rosa handles most of the cooking and cleaning. I suppose you could help her, learn the routines. Maybe take over some of the bookkeeping. Sarah used to handle the accounts." Again, the comparison to his first wife. Clara bit back her frustration and nodded. "I'm quite good with numbers," she said. "I kept the books for my stepfather's business in Philadelphia." She didn't mention that it had been one of the few things that had made her valuable enough to keep around after her mother's death. Over the following days, Clara threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, with a determination that surprised everyone, including herself. She worked alongside Rosa in the kitchen, learning to cook for a crew of hungry cowboys. She studied the ranch's financial records, quickly identifying several areas where costs could be reduced and efficiency improved. She even convinced Jake to let her help with some of the lighter ranch work, despite his obvious skepticism. It was during one of these work sessions, as she helped sort cattle in the main corral, that disaster struck. A young bull, spooked by something Clara couldn't identify, charged directly at her. She froze, her city-bred instincts failing her completely in the face of a ton of angry deef bearing down on her. Jake's reaction was instantaneous and purely protective. He launched himself from his horse, tackling Clara and rolling them both out of the bull's path just as the animal thundered past. They landed hard in the dust, Jake's body covering hers protectively as the bull crashed into the fence where she had been standing just seconds before. For a moment, they lay there in the dirt, both breathing hard from the adrenaline and shock. Clara was acutely aware of Jake's weight pressing her into the ground, of the warmth of his body, and the rapid beating of his heart against her chest. When she looked up into his face, she saw something there that hadn't been present before. Genuine concern and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Clara shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Jake's eyes dropped to her lips, and for a moment, she thought he might forget her warning about kissing her. Part of her hoped he would. But then he was pulling away, helping her to her feet with hands that weren't quite steady. "You could have been killed," he said, and there was anger in his voice now. Anger born of fear. "What were you thinking, getting that close to the cattle?" "I was thinking I wanted to help," Clara shot back, her own temper flaring. "I was thinking I wanted to be useful instead of just another mouth to feed." She brushed the dust from her skirts with sharp, angry movements. "But clearly you'd prefer I stay in the house like a proper decoration." "That's not what I meant," Jake said. But Clara was already walking away, her back straight with wounded pride. She didn't see the way he watched her go, or the conflict that played across his features as he struggled with feelings he hadn't expected to develop. That night, Clara sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The events of the day had shaken her more than she cared to admit. Not just the near miss with the bull, but the moment afterward, when she had seen something in Jake's eyes that looked almost like caring. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "Mind if I sit?" Jake asked, gesturing to the chair beside her. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the vast western sky. "I owe you an apology," Jake said finally. "You were right. I've been treating you like a decoration. It's just—" He paused, struggling with the words. Sarah was born to this life. She knew instinctively how to handle herself around the animals, how to read the weather, how to survive out here. I keep forgetting that you're learning all of this from scratch. "I'm stronger than I look," Clara said quietly. "I've had to be." She turned to face him, her green eyes serious in the moonlight. "I know I'm not Sarah, Jake. I'll never be Sarah. But I can be something else, something valuable in my own right, if you'll let me." Jake studied her face in the dim light, seeing perhaps for the first time the steel beneath her refined exterior. "What happened to you back in Philadelphia?" he asked gently. "What made you answer my advertisement?" Clara was quiet for so long that Jake thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My mother died when I was 15. My stepfather, he wasn't a kind man. He kept me around because I was useful. I could cook, clean, keep his books, entertain his business associates. But as I got older, he started looking at me differently, started making suggestions about how I could be even more useful to him." She shuddered, and Jake felt a cold anger settle in his chest. "When I saw your advertisement, it seemed like a miracle, a chance to escape, to start over somewhere he could never find me." She looked at Jake directly, her chin raised in that familiar gesture of defiance. "I may not know how to handle cattle or read the weather, but I know how to survive. I know how to work hard and make myself valuable. All I need is a chance." Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart beginning to crack. This woman beside him wasn't the helpless city girl he had assumed her to be. She was a survivor, someone who had faced hardship and emerged stronger for it, someone who might, given time and patience, become exactly what the ranch needed. "All right," he said finally, "we'll do this differently. I'll teach you what you need to know about ranch life, and you can teach me about those improvements you mentioned for the books. Partners, like you said." He extended his hand to her, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. The handshake lasted longer than it should have, both of them aware of the warmth of the contact and the promise it represented. When Clara finally pulled her hand away, she was smiling, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her since her arrival. "Partners," she agreed, and something in the way she said it made Jake's heart skip a beat. The next few weeks brought a gradual but noticeable change in the dynamic between Jake and Clara. True to his word, Jake began teaching her the practical skills she needed to survive on the ranch. He showed her how to read the signs that indicated a storm was coming, how to approach the horses safely, how to tell when cattle were agitated or sick. Clara proved to be a quick and eager student, her natural intelligence and determination serving her well. In return, Clara revolutionized the ranch's bookkeeping system, implementing organizational methods she had learned in Philadelphia that saved both time and money. She also began taking over more of the household management, working with Rosa to plan meals and manage supplies with an efficiency that impressed even the skeptical ranch hands. But it was the small moments between them that began to matter most. The way Jake's hand would linger when he helped her down from a horse. The way Clara's eyes would light up when she saw him returning from a long day on the range. The conversations that stretched late into the evening as they sat on the porch, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Jake found himself looking forward to these moments with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified him. He had married Clara out of practical necessity, but somewhere along the way, she had become something more than just a convenient arrangement. She had become important. The realization hit him like a physical blow one evening as he watched her working in Rosa's garden, her sleeves rolled up and dirt smudged on her cheek as she carefully tended the vegetables. The setting sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and when she looked up and smiled at him, Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. He was falling in love with his wife. The thought should have been comforting, but instead, it filled him with a cold dread. He had loved Sarah with everything he had, and when she died, the pain had nearly destroyed him. He had sworn never to open himself up to that kind of vulnerability again, but Clara was making it impossible to keep that promise. Clara, for her part, was fighting her own battle with unexpected emotions. She had entered this marriage expecting nothing more than safety and security. But Jake was proving to be far more than she had bargained for. Beneath his gruff exterior, she had discovered a man of deep integrity and surprising gentleness. The way he treated his animals, his employees, even her, spoke of a character that drew her like a moth to flame. But she remembered his warning about kissing, and she held herself back, afraid to push too hard, too fast. She had seen the way he still looked at Sarah's things sometimes, the pain that flickered across his features when her name came up in conversation. Clara didn't want to be a replacement for his lost love. She wanted to be chosen for herself. The tension between them might have continued indefinitely if not for the arrival of unexpected visitors. Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. She looked up to see a group of riders cresting the hill, and her blood ran cold when she recognized the man in the lead. Her stepfather, Marcus Whitmore, sat his horse like a man accustomed to command, his cold gray eyes scanning the ranch with calculating interest. Behind him rode two men Clara didn't recognize, but their hard faces and the guns at their hips marked them clearly as hired muscle. "Clara!" Marcus called out, his voice carrying the false warmth she remembered so well. "My dear stepdaughter, you've led us quite a chase." He dismounted with fluid grace, straightening his expensive coat as he approached. "When you disappeared so suddenly, I was beside myself with worry. I've come to take you home." Clara felt her knees go weak, but she forced herself to stand straight, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. "I am home," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I'm married now, Mr. Whitmore. My place is here." Marcus's smile was cold and predatory. "Married? To some frontier nobody?" He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "My dear girl, that can be easily remedied. I have connections, influence, a simple annulment, and you'll be free to return to Philadelphia where you belong." "She belongs here." Jake's voice cut through the air like a blade as he emerged from the barn, his hand resting casually on the butt of his gun. "And she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Marcus turned his attention to Jake, his eyes narrowing as he took in the tall rancher's confident stance and obvious capability. "You must be the husband," he said with disdain. "I'm Marcus Whitmore, Clara's stepfather and legal guardian. I'm here to collect what's mine." "She's not yours," Jake said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that made Marcus's hired men shift nervously in their saddles. "She's my wife, and she's under my protection now." "Protection?" Marcus laughed again. "From what? A life of comfort and security in Philadelphia? I can offer her things you never could, cowboy. Education, culture, a place in society. What can you give her? Dust and cattle and the constant threat of Indian raids?" Clara stepped forward, her chin raised. In that gesture, Jake had come to love. "He can give me respect," she said clearly. "He can give me a voice in my own life, the freedom to make my own choices. Things you never offered me, Marcus." Marcus's facade of civility slipped, revealing the cruel man beneath. "You ungrateful little." He started toward Clara, his hand raised as if to strike her, but Jake moved with lightning speed, intercepting him and grabbing his wrist in a grip that made the older man wince. "I wouldn't," Jake said softly, his voice carrying a threat that made Marcus's hired guns reach for their weapons. The ranch hands, who had been watching from various positions around the yard, suddenly appeared with rifles in their hands, the odds shifting dramatically in Jake's favor. "You're outnumbered, Whitmore," Jake continued, releasing the man's wrist with a slight shove. "And you're trespassing on my land. I suggest you mount up and ride out while you still can." Marcus rubbed his wrist, his eyes blazing with fury and humiliation. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I have resources, connections. I'll be back with the law, with papers that will prove she belongs to me." "Let him try," Clara said, stepping closer to Jake. "I'm of legal age, and I'm married of my own free will. No court in the territory will force me to return to a man who—" She stopped, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Marcus's face went white with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. "For now. We'll see about that," he said, signaling to his men. "This isn't finished, Clara. You'll come home eventually, one way or another." As the three men rode away, Clara felt her legs finally give out. Jake caught her before she could fall, his strong arms wrapping around her as she trembled with reaction. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "He's gone. I won't let him take you." Clara looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "He'll be back," she whispered. "He doesn't give up easily, and he has money, influence. What if he can find a way to force me to return?" Jake's arms tightened around her, and when he spoke, his voice was fierce with determination. "Then he'll have to go through me first, and I promise you, Clara, that's not going to happen." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You're my wife, my partner, and I protect what's mine." The word mine sent a shiver through Clara that had nothing to do with fear. She saw something in Jake's eyes that she had been hoping to see for weeks. Not just protectiveness, but something deeper. Something that looked very much like love. "Jake," she whispered, and he seemed to understand what she was asking without words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips were just a breath away from hers. "I thought you said you'd run if I kissed you," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Clara smiled through her tears, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "I lied," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. The kiss was everything Clara had dreamed it would be, and more. It was gentle, but passionate, tender, but demanding, a claiming that went both ways. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Clara could see her own wonder reflected in Jake's dark eyes. "I love you," he said simply, the words falling between them like a benediction. "I didn't want to, didn't plan to, but I do." You're not Sarah, and I'm glad. You're Clara, and you're exactly what I need. Clara felt her heart soar, all the fear and uncertainty of the past weeks melting away in the face of his declaration. I love you too, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him again. I have for weeks, but I was afraid you'd never see me as anything more than a poor substitute for your first wife. Never, Jake said fiercely, pulling her close again. You're not a substitute for anyone. You're the woman I choose, the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. He paused, his expression growing serious. But Clara, I need you to know, if Whitmore comes back, if he tries to take you, there might be trouble. Real trouble. Are you prepared for that? Clara thought of the life she had left behind, of the years of fear and subjugation under Marcus's roof. Then she looked at the man holding her, at the ranch spread out around them, at the life they could build together. I'm not running anymore, she said firmly. This is my home. You're my husband, and I'll fight for what's ours. Jake's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. In that case, Mrs. Morrison, he said, sweeping her up in his arms, I think it's time we made this marriage real in every sense of the word. As he carried her toward the house, Clara laughed with pure joy, her arms wrapped around his neck. Behind them, the sun was setting over the vast expanse of their ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It was a new beginning, a chance at the kind of love Clara had never dared to dream of. And if Marcus Whitmore wanted to challenge that, he would discover that the refined city girl he had tried to control had found her strength in the arms of a man who would move heaven and earth to protect her. The frontier had a way of revealing what people were truly made of, and Clara Morrison was made of steel wrapped in silk, with a heart brave enough to claim the love she deserved. The threat of her stepfather's return still loomed, but for now, in this moment, Clara was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had seen past her fears to the woman beneath, who had chosen her not as a replacement for what he had lost, but as the beginning of something entirely new. As Jake carried her across the threshold of their home, Clara knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. She had threatened to run if he kissed her, but now she knew the truth. She would never run from Jake Morrison. She would run to him, with him, beside him, for all the days of their lives. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Copper Creek weeks ago had been running from her past. But Clara Morrison was running toward her future, and it was more beautiful than anything she had ever dared to imagine. A verificação final do roteiro. Parte 1, 4.847 caracteres. Parte 2, 8.925 caracteres. Parte 3, 8.756 caracteres. Parte 4, 6.432 caracteres. Parte 5, 4.923 caracteres. Total de caracteres do roteiro, 33.883 caracteres. Status de comprimento total, correto, dentro do intervalo de 27.000 a 33.000 caracteres, mais tolerância. Verificação de idioma. Ok. Pronte para thumbnail. A dramática cena fitindo uma determinada jovem mulher em uma armadaia vitoriana está desprincipitada no trem-plataforma, feite a um largo e radiante cowboy de camisa preta e leather. A dona tem cabelos albos e olhos verdes, enquanto o cowboy tem faces marcados e olhos escuros, pontuando quisticismo e intriga. Behind them, a frontier town with wooden buildings, a saloon, and a church steeple stretches under a brilliant blue sky with puffy white clouds. The scene is bathed in golden afternoon sunlight, capturing the tension and romance of their first meeting. Dust swirls around their feet, and in the background, a steam locomotive sits at the station. The image should convey both the harsh beauty of the American frontier and the electric attraction between two strong-willed people from different worlds. Prompts para images de cenas, por parte. Prompt parte uno. A refined young woman in an emerald dress, standing alone on a wooden train platform in a frontier town, clutching a carpet bag with white knuckles. Her face shows a mixture of determination and fear as she faces an uncertain future. The scene captures her vulnerability and courage. She's clearly out of place in this rough Western setting, but her raised chin shows her resolve. Behind her, the train that brought her west releases steam into the bright afternoon air, while the dusty main street of Copper Creek stretches beyond with its wooden buildings and saloon. The lighting emphasizes her isolation and the magnitude of the step she's taken, with long shadows and golden sunlight highlighting the contrast between her refined appearance and the rugged frontier environment. Prompt Part 2. A tense moment in a ranch corral where a young woman in work clothes has frozen in terror as an angry bull charges directly at her. A cowboy is captured mid-leap from his horse, diving to tackle the woman out of harm's way, his face showing fierce protective instinct. Dust kicks up around them as the massive bull thunders past, its horns gleaming in the sunlight. Ranch hands watch in alarm from the fence rails, and the scene captures the split-second drama of life and death on the frontier. The image should convey both the danger of ranch life and the growing bond between the couple, with the cowboy's protective action revealing his deepening feelings for his mail-order bride. A confrontational scene in front of a stone ranch house where a well-dressed, cold-eyed man in an expensive coat faces off against a tall cowboy, while a young woman stands between them with her chin raised defiantly. The stepfather's hired gunmen sit mounted behind him, their hands near their weapons, while ranch hands with rifles have emerged from various buildings to support their boss. The tension is palpable in the dusty ranch yard, with the woman clearly choosing her cowboy husband over her threatening stepfather. The scene should capture the moment of truth, where past and present collide, with the beautiful ranch landscape in the background emphasizing what's at stake. Golden afternoon light casts dramatic shadows, highlighting the determination on the woman's face and the protective stance of her husband. 1. Estados Unidos. 2. Kiss me and I'll run. The mail-order bride threatened, but the cowboy didn't step back. 3. Vos se criará con base no título. 4. Inglés. 27,000 a 33,000. Expert logo velho. Oeste tercera pessoa onisciente. Perfecto. Vou criar un roteiro envolvente, ambientado no velho oeste americano, com base nos parâmetros fornecidos. Comenzaré agora con a historia completa. A morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform of Copper Creek Station as the westbound train wheezed to a stop, steam hissing from its iron belly like an exhausted beast. Among the handful of passengers who stepped down onto the weathered planks was a young woman whose emerald dress stood out like a jewel against the browns and grays of the frontier town. Clara Whitmore clutched her leather satchel tightly, her knuckles white beneath her lace gloves as she surveyed the ramshackle buildings that would now be her home. The acrid smell of coal smoke mixed with dust and horse manure filled her nostrils, a far cry from the rose gardens of her childhood in Philadelphia. Her heart raced with a mixture of terror and desperate hope as she remembered the words that had driven her to this God-forsaken place. "Kiss me, and I'll run." Those had been her exact words to every suitor her stepfather had paraded before her. And until now, every man had backed away in shock at her brazen threat. But Thomas Garrett, the rancher who had answered her mail-order bride advertisement, had written back with an intriguing response. "Then I suppose I'll have to make sure you want to stay." Now standing on this dusty platform, with nowhere else to go and creditors breathing down her neck back east, Clara wondered if she had finally met a man who wouldn't be intimidated by her fierce independence. The station master, a grizzled old man with tobacco-stained whiskers, approached her with a knowing smile. "You must be Miss Whitmore," he said, tipping his worn hat. "Tom Garrett's been waiting for you. He's just over yonder by the water trough." Clara's eyes followed his pointing finger to where a tall, broad-shouldered man stood with his back to her, his dark hair visible beneath a well-worn Stetson. Even from a distance, she could see the confident way he carried himself, the easy grace with which he moved as he spoke to his horse. This was the man who had promised to give her a new life, a fresh start, away from the suffocating expectations and mounting debts that had plagued her in Philadelphia. But as she watched him, Clara felt a familiar surge of panic. What if he expected her to be meek and submissive, like all the other mail-order brides? What if he tried to control her the way her stepfather had? Her hand instinctively moved to the small derringer hidden in her reticule, a reminder that she would never again be at any man's mercy. Before I continue with this incredible story of courage and unexpected love, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means the world to us, and I love connecting with viewers from all over. Now let's see what happens when Clara finally comes face to face with the mysterious Thomas Garrett. Thomas turned as he heard footsteps approaching, and Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 years old, with weathered hands that spoke of hard work and honest labor. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and intense, and when they met hers, she felt an unexpected jolt of electricity run through her body. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way that was entirely different from the soft, pampered men of Philadelphia society. "Miss Whitmore?" he said, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair that caught the morning light. His voice was deep and warm, with just a hint of a Texas drawl. "Welcome to Copper Creek." Clara lifted her chin defiantly, determined to establish her independence from the very beginning. "Mr. Garrett," she replied coolly, "I want to make something clear right from the start. I'm not some simpering flower who will swoon at your feet. I have my own mind, my own opinions, and I won't be told what to do." To her surprise, Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. "Good," he said simply. "I was hoping you'd have some fire in you. Life out here isn't easy, and I need a partner, not a decoration." His unexpected response threw Clara off balance. She had been prepared for anger, for demands that she know her place, for the kind of masculine outrage that had greeted her defiance back east. Instead, Thomas seemed almost pleased by her boldness. "I mean it," she pressed on, her voice rising slightly. "I won't be controlled or manipulated. And if you think you can intimidate me into submission, you're wrong. Kiss me and I'll run. That's what I told every man who tried to claim ownership of me." Thomas stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. His eyes never left hers as he reached up and gently touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "Then I guess I'll just have to make sure you never want to run," he said softly. And before Clara could protest or pull away, his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and possessive, tender and demanding. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Clara felt herself melting into his embrace, despite every instinct that screamed at her to flee. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to remain aloof, independent, untouchable. But Thomas's kiss awakened something deep within her that she had thought buried forever. A longing for connection and belonging that terrified her more than any threat ever could. When they finally broke apart, Clara was breathing hard, her cheeks flushed, and her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. "I should run," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her racing heart. "But you won't," Thomas replied with quiet confidence, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Because you're tired of running, Clara. You're tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. And so am I." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She was tired, bone-deep, soul-weary, tired of fighting the world alone. But admitting that felt like admitting defeat, like surrendering the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. "You don't know anything about me," she said, trying to inject some of her old defiance into her voice. "I know enough," Thomas replied, taking her satchel from her trembling hands. "I know you're brave enough to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. I know you're strong enough to threaten to run rather than be controlled. And I know you're smart enough to recognize a good thing when you see it." As they walked toward his wagon, Clara found herself stealing glances at this man who had so easily dismantled her defenses with a single kiss. The wagon was sturdy and well-maintained, pulled by two strong horses that nickered softly as Thomas approached. He helped her up onto the seat with a gentleness that surprised her, his hands steady and sure as they guided her. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from town," he explained as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. "It's not much to look at yet, but it's got good water and plenty of room to grow. I've been working it alone for 3 years now, ever since I bought it from old Pete Morrison." Clara nodded, trying to focus on his words rather than the way his presence beside her made her skin tingle with awareness. "Why did you decide to send for a mail-order bride?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Surely there are women in town who would be interested in marrying a successful rancher." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the dusty trail ahead. "I tried courting the local girls," he said finally. "But they all wanted the same thing, a husband who would keep them safe and comfortable while they raised babies and tended house. There's nothing wrong with that. But I wanted something more. I wanted a partner, someone who could stand beside me and help build something lasting. When I read your advertisement, something about the way you wrote told me you might be that kind of woman." Clara felt a flutter of something that might have been hope in her chest. "What did I write that gave you that impression?" she asked. "You said you were looking for a new beginning, not a rescue," Thomas replied, glancing at her with those storm-gray eyes. "You said you wanted to build a life, not just live one. That told me you weren't looking for someone to take care of you. You were looking for someone to take care of with." The simple honesty of his words made Clara's throat tight with emotion. No one had ever seen her that way before, as someone capable of giving rather than just taking, of building rather than just existing. Her stepfather had seen her only as a burden to be disposed of, her suitors only as a prize to be won. But Thomas saw her as an equal, a partner, and that recognition was more seductive than any kiss could ever be. As they rode through the rolling hills and wide-open spaces of Texas, Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all golden grass and endless sky, so different from the crowded streets and sooty buildings of Philadelphia. Here, she could breathe. Here, she could be herself without constantly looking over her shoulder for creditors or stepfathers or disapproving society matrons. "Tell me about your family," Thomas said as they crested a small hill that offered a view of the valley below. "Your letters mention that you were alone in the world." Clara's jaw tightened at the reminder of her past. "My parents died when I was 16, she said carefully. "My mother remarried before she died, and my stepfather, well, let's just say we didn't see eye to eye on my future. He wanted to control you," Thomas said, "and it wasn't a question. He wanted to marry me off to the highest bidder to pay his gambling debts." Clara replied bitterly. "When I refused, he threatened to have me committed to an asylum for being hysterical and unmanageable. That's when I decided to answer your advertisement." Thomas's hands tightened on the reins, and Clara could see the muscle in his jaw working. "He threatened to have you committed for refusing to marry someone you didn't want?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "It's perfectly legal," Clara said with forced lightness. "A woman who defies male authority can be declared mentally incompetent and locked away indefinitely. It happens more often than you might think." "Not here," Thomas said firmly. "Not on my land, not in my house. Here you're free to be exactly who you are, Clara. No one will ever threaten you or try to control you again. I give you my word on that." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Clara's heart skip a beat. She had been taking care of herself for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else willing to stand up for her. It was both thrilling and terrifying, this feeling of being cherished and protected. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her since she stepped off the train. "You barely know me. For all you know, I could be exactly as hysterical and unmanageable as my stepfather claimed." Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious and intent. "Because I've seen how you carry yourself, Clara. I've seen the strength in your spine and the fire in your eyes. I've heard the way you speak, intelligent, articulate, passionate. A truly hysterical woman couldn't have traveled across the country alone, couldn't have had the courage to start over with a complete stranger. Your stepfather wasn't trying to protect you or anyone else. He was trying to break you because your strength threatened him." Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough tears over her stepfather's cruelty. She wouldn't waste any more on the past. "And you're not threatened by strong women?" she asked, testing him. "I'm attracted to them," Thomas replied without hesitation. "A weak woman would wither and die out here within a year. But a strong woman could help me build an empire." The wagon crested another hill, and suddenly Clara could see Thomas's ranch spread out before them in the valley below. It was modest but well-maintained, with a sturdy two-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures, and she could see the glint of water from a creek that wound through the property. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a place where a person could put down roots and build a real life. "It's wonderful," Clara breathed, and she meant it. After months of uncertainty and fear, the sight of this peaceful, prosperous ranch felt like a promise of security and belonging. "It could be ours," Thomas said quietly, "if you'll have me, if you'll stay." Clara looked at him, this man who had kissed her fears away and offered her a partnership instead of a prison. The smart thing would be to maintain her distance, to keep her options open, to remember that she barely knew him. But her heart was already making the decision for her, drawn to his strength and kindness like a moth to flame. "I'll stay," she said softly, and the smile that spread across Thomas's face was like sunrise after the longest night of her life. As they drove down toward the ranch house, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she could belong. A man who would value her strength instead of trying to break it. And maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. The ranch house was even more welcoming up close than it had appeared from the hill. The front porch was wide and inviting, with 2 rocking chairs that suggested peaceful evenings watching the sunset. Flower boxes beneath the windows held cheerful yellow marigolds. And Clara was surprised to see lace curtains in the windows, a feminine touch she hadn't expected in a bachelor's home. "My sister helped me fix up the house before she moved to California with her husband," Thomas explained, noticing her surprised expression. "She said no woman would want to live in a place that looked like a bunkhouse." Clara smiled at the thoughtfulness behind the gesture. "Your sister sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Thomas agreed, helping Clara down from the wagon. "She also left strict instructions that I was to treat my future wife like a queen, not a hired hand. I'm hoping you'll let me try." Before Clara could respond, the front door burst open, and a young Mexican woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron and beaming with excitement. She was perhaps 25 years old, with kind dark eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Señor Tomás," she exclaimed, hurrying down the porch steps, "you have brought home your bride. ¡Qué hermosa!" "Clara, this is Maria Santos," Thomas said warmly. "She keeps house for me and cooks better than anyone in 3 counties. Maria, this is Miss Clara Whitmore, my wife-to-be." Maria's smile grew even wider as she took Clara's hands in both of hers. "Welcome, welcome. I've been so excited to meet you. Señor Thomas, he has been like a nervous schoolboy for weeks, cleaning and re-cleaning everything, making sure the house was perfect for you." Clara glanced at Thomas and was charmed to see a faint blush creeping up his neck. The idea that this confident, capable man had been nervous about her arrival was both endearing and reassuring. "The house is beautiful," Clara said sincerely. "Thank you for taking such good care of it." "Come, come," Maria said, still holding Clara's hands. "You must be tired from your journey. I have prepared the guest room for you, and there is hot water for a bath." "We will have plenty of time to talk later." As Maria led her into the house, Clara was struck by how warm and welcoming it felt. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was spotlessly clean. Colorful Mexican blankets added warmth to the rooms, and the smell of something delicious wafted from the kitchen. This was a home, not just a house, and Clara felt some of the tension she had been carrying for months begin to ease from her shoulders. "The guest room is just up here," Maria said, leading Clara up a narrow staircase to the 2nd floor. "Señor Thomas, he wanted you to have your own space until you are ready for other arrangements." Clara appreciated Thomas's consideration more than she could express. After months of feeling trapped and powerless, having her own space felt like a luxury beyond measure. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a single bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. "It's perfect," Clara said, setting her satchel on the bed. "Thank you, Maria." "De nada," Maria replied with a warm smile. "I will bring you hot water for washing, and then you must come down for supper. I have made Señor Thomas's favorite, beef stew with cornbread. I hope you will like it too." After Maria left, Clara sank down on the edge of the bed and allowed herself a moment to process everything that had happened since she stepped off the train. In the space of a few hours, her entire world had shifted. She had expected to find a rough, demanding man who would try to control her, just as her stepfather had. Instead, she had found Thomas, gentle, respectful, and surprisingly understanding. But even as relief flooded through her, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too good to be true. In her experience, men who seemed kind and understanding often revealed their true nature once they felt secure in their power over a woman. She had learned to be suspicious of kindness, to look for the trap hidden beneath the gift. As she unpacked her few belongings, Clara's hand brushed against the small derringer hidden in her reticule. She had carried it with her from Philadelphia, a last line of defense against a world that seemed determined to crush her spirit. Now, in this peaceful room, in this welcoming house, it seemed almost absurd. But she left it where it was, just in case. Old habits died hard, and Clara had learned the hard way that it was better to be prepared for betrayal than to be caught off guard by it. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Clara?" Thomas's voice was gentle, respectful. "Maria has supper ready, if you'd like to join us." "I'll be right down," Clara called back, smoothing her skirts and checking her appearance in the small mirror above the washstand. She looked tired and travel-worn, but there was something different in her eyes, a spark of hope that hadn't been there that morning. Downstairs, the kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of Maria's cooking. Thomas had changed out of his work clothes into clean trousers and a white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He stood when Clara entered the room, pulling out a chair for her at the small wooden table. "I hope you're hungry," he said with a smile. "Maria's been cooking all day in your honor." The stew was delicious, rich and hearty, and the cornbread was still warm from the oven. As they ate, Thomas told Clara about the ranch, how many head of cattle he ran, his plans for expansion, the challenges of ranching in Texas. Clara found herself genuinely interested in his stories, impressed by his knowledge and his obvious love for the land. "What about you?" Thomas asked as Maria served generous slices of apple pie for dessert. "What did you do back in Philadelphia? Your letters mentioned that you had some education." Clara hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about her past. "I worked as a governess for several families," she said carefully. "I taught their children reading, writing, arithmetic, and French. I also helped manage their households when needed." "You speak French?" Thomas asked, clearly impressed. "Oui, couramment," Clara replied automatically, then blushed at her own show-off response. "I mean, yes, fluently. My mother insisted on a proper education for me, even though my stepfather thought it was a waste of money." "It's not a waste," Thomas said firmly. "Education is never a waste. Maybe you could teach the children in town. There's no proper school here yet, and the parents would pay well for someone with your qualifications." The idea of teaching again, of having a purpose beyond just surviving, sent a thrill of excitement through Clara. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "I've missed teaching." As the evening wore on, Clara found herself relaxing more and more in Thomas's company. He was intelligent and well-read, despite his rough exterior, and he listened to her opinions with genuine interest, rather than the patronizing tolerance she was used to from men. When she mentioned her love of books, his face lit up with enthusiasm. "I have a small library upstairs," he said eagerly. "Nothing fancy, but I've collected quite a few volumes over the years. You're welcome to read anything you like." The offer of access to books felt almost as precious as the offer of marriage itself. Clara had been forced to leave her beloved collection behind in Philadelphia, and the thought of having books to read again made her heart sing with joy. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Thomas suggested they sit on the front porch to watch the sunset. Clara agreed, curious to see more of this beautiful land that might become her home. They settled into the rocking chairs, and Clara was struck by how peaceful it felt to sit beside Thomas in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into evening. "It's beautiful here," Clara said softly, breathing in the clean, sweet air that was so different from the smoky atmosphere of Philadelphia. "I can see why you love it." "It gets in your blood," Thomas agreed. "The freedom, the space, the feeling that you can build something lasting here. Back east, everything feels so constrained. Here, a person can be whoever they want to be." Clara understood exactly what he meant. Already, she could feel some of the tight knots of anxiety in her chest beginning to loosen. Here, she didn't have to constantly look over her shoulder or worry about saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. Here, she could breathe. "Thomas," she said hesitantly, "I want you to know that I meant what I said earlier, about not being controlled. I've spent too many years having other people make decisions for me, and I won't go back to that. If we're going to make this work, it has to be as equals." Thomas turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "I wouldn't want it any other way, Clara. I told you, I need a partner, not a possession. That means your opinions matter, your dreams matter, your happiness matters. I want to build something with you, not for you." The sincerity in his voice made Clara's heart flutter with something that felt dangerously like love. It was too soon for such feelings, she told herself sternly. She barely knew this man, despite the connection she felt with him. But there was something about Thomas that made her want to trust him, want to believe that he was different from every other man she had known. "What if I disappoint you?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her all day. "What if I'm not the woman you think I am? What if I'm too independent, too stubborn, too difficult?" Thomas reached over and took her hand in his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "Clara, you traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger, rather than submit to a man who wanted to control you. You threatened to run rather than be intimidated. You've survived things that would break most people, and you're still fighting. How could I be anything but proud to call you my wife?" His words washed over her like a healing balm, soothing wounds she hadn't even realized were still bleeding. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly seen and valued for who she was, rather than who someone else wanted her to be. "I'm scared," she admitted in a whisper. "I'm scared of trusting you, scared of letting my guard down, scared of being hurt again." "I know," Thomas said gently, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "And I'm scared too, scared of not being good enough for you, scared of not being able to protect you from whatever drove you here, scared of losing you before I've even really had ye. But maybe we can be scared together, and maybe that will make us both a little braver." Clara looked at him in the gathering twilight. This man who had already shown her more kindness and respect than she had received in years. The smart thing would be to keep her walls up, to protect herself from potential heartbreak. But Clara was tired of being smart, tired of being careful, tired of being alone. "Kiss me," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Kiss me, and I promise I won't run." Thomas's eyes widened in surprise, then darkened with something that made Clara's pulse race. He stood slowly, drawing her up with him, and cupped her face in his hands with infinite tenderness. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Because once I kiss you again, Clara, I'm not going to want to let you go." "I'm sure," Clara whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. This kiss was different from the one at the train station, deeper, more intimate, full of promise and possibility. Clara felt herself melting into his embrace, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, as she kissed him back with all the passion she had kept locked away for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "Still want to run?" he asked teasingly. "No," Clara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I want to stay. I want to build something beautiful with you, Thomas Garrett. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word," she said. "Then marry me," Thomas said, his voice urgent and full of hope. "Not because you have to, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Marry me because you choose me, Clara, the same way I choose you." Clara looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw her future reflected there, a future full of love and respect and partnership, a future where she could be herself without fear or shame. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you, Thomas. I choose you too." The next morning dawned bright and clear, with the promise of a beautiful day ahead. Clara woke in her comfortable guest room, feeling more rested than she had in months, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was actually excited about what the day might bring. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted up from the kitchen, and she could hear the low murmur of voices. Thomas and Maria, probably discussing the day's work. Clara dressed quickly in her best dress, a deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair up in a style that was both practical and flattering. Today was her wedding day, and she wanted to look her best for the man who had already given her so much. Downstairs, she found Thomas and Maria deep in conversation over breakfast. Thomas looked up as she entered, and the admiration in his eyes made her cheeks warm with pleasure. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Clara replied honestly, accepting the cup of coffee Maria pressed into her hands. "Thank you both for making me feel so welcome." "Today is a special day," Maria said with a beaming smile. "A wedding day. I have already sent word to Padre Miguel. He will meet us at the church in town at noon, and I have prepared a special lunch for after the ceremony." Clara felt a flutter of nerves at the mention of the ceremony. In just a few hours, she would be Mrs. Thomas Garrett, bound to this man by law and custom. But looking at Thomas across the breakfast table, seeing the warmth and affection in his eyes, her nerves settled into excited anticipation. This was right. This was what she wanted. "I should warn you," Thomas said with a grin. "Half the town will probably show up for the wedding. News travels fast in a place this small, and everyone's curious about my mysterious mail-order bride." "Let them be curious," Clara said, with more confidence than she felt. I'm not ashamed of how we met, and I'm certainly not ashamed of marrying you. Thomas's smile grew even wider at her words. That's my brave girl, he said softly, and Clara felt her heart skip a beat at the possessive warmth in his voice. After breakfast, Thomas excused himself to handle some urgent ranch business, promising to return in time to escort Clara to town for the ceremony. Maria immediately took charge, bustling around the house and making preparations with the efficiency of a general planning a campaign. "We must make you the most beautiful bride Texas has ever seen," Maria declared, leading Clara upstairs to her room. "I have something special for you, a gift from Señor Thomas." She produced a small wooden box from Clara's dresser, and when Clara opened it, she gasped in delight. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small turquoise pendant, simple but elegant. "It belonged to his mother," Maria explained softly. "He wanted you to have something of hers to wear on your wedding day." Clara's eyes filled with tears at the thoughtfulness of the gesture. To give her his mother's jewelry was a sign of acceptance and belonging that touched her more deeply than any expensive gift could have. "It's beautiful," she whispered, lifting the necklace from its box with reverent fingers. "Help me put it on." Maria fastened the necklace around Clara's throat, and the turquoise pendant settled perfectly at the base of her neck, complementing her blue dress beautifully. "Perfect," Maria said with satisfaction. "Now you are truly ready to become Senora Garrett." As they prepared to leave for town, Clara caught sight of herself in the mirror and was surprised by what she saw. The woman looking back at her was radiant with happiness, her eyes bright with hope and excitement. This was not the frightened, desperate woman who had fled Philadelphia just days ago. This was a woman ready to embrace her future, ready to build a new life with the man she was coming to love. Thomas was waiting by the wagon when they came downstairs, and Clara's breath caught at the sight of him. He had dressed in his finest clothes, a black suit that emphasized his tall, lean frame, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved carefully, leaving his skin smooth and touchable. He looked every inch the successful rancher, but more than that, he looked like a man in love. "You're beautiful," he said simply when he saw her, and the reverence in his voice made Clara's heart sing. "Are you ready to become my wife?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," Clara replied, and she meant every word. The ride to town was filled with comfortable conversation and shared laughter. Thomas told her about the people they would meet at the church, warning her about the town gossips and promising to protect her from any unwelcome questions. Clara found herself relaxing more and more as they talked, marveling at how easy it was to be with him, how natural their conversation felt. The church was a small, simple building made of local stone, with a bell tower that rose proudly against the blue Texas sky. As Thomas had predicted, quite a crowd had gathered for the ceremony. Ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, even some of the local children who had come to see the excitement. Clara felt a moment of nervousness as all eyes turned to her, but Thomas's steady presence beside her gave her courage. Padre Miguel was a kindly older man, with twinkling eyes and a warm smile. He greeted Clara, in both English and Spanish, making her feel immediately welcome in his church. "It is always a joy to perform a wedding ceremony," he said as he led them to the altar. "But it is especially joyful when I can see that the couple truly cares for each other." The ceremony itself was simple but moving. Clara had attended elaborate society weddings in Philadelphia, full of pomp and circumstance, but often lacking in genuine emotion. This was different, intimate, heartfelt, real. When Thomas took her hands in his and spoke his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish her for all the days of his life, Clara felt tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. "I, Clara, take you, Thomas, to be my husband," she said when it was her turn, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "I promise to stand beside you as your partner and equal, to support your dreams and share your burdens, to love you with all my heart for as long as we both shall live." When Padre Miguel pronounced them husband and wife and invited Thomas to kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was tender and full of promise. The small congregation erupted in cheers and applause, and Clara felt overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance of these people who were now her neighbors and friends. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Clara caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the church, and her blood ran cold. There, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing a cold smile, was her stepfather, Harold Whitmore. Their eyes met across the crowded church, and Clara saw the malicious satisfaction in his gaze. He had found her. Somehow, despite all her precautions, he had tracked her down to this remote corner of Texas. And from the look on his face, he had not come to wish her well. Clara's steps faltered as she saw Harold, and Thomas immediately noticed her distress. "What is it?" he asked quietly, his arm tightening protectively around her waist. "What's wrong?" "My stepfather," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible above the congratulations of the wedding guests. "He's here, at the back of the church." Thomas's head turned sharply, and Clara saw his jaw clench as he spotted Harold's imposing figure. Even from a distance, her stepfather cut an intimidating figure. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of cold authority that had terrorized Clara for years. "Stay close to me," Thomas murmured, his voice taking on a hard edge that Clara had never heard before. "Whatever he wants, whatever he says, remember that you're my wife now. He has no power over you here." But even as Thomas spoke those reassuring words, Clara felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. Harold had not traveled all this way just to congratulate her on her marriage. He wanted something, and in her experience, Harold Whitmore always got what he wanted, one way or another. As they made their way through the crowd of well-wishers, Harold began moving toward them with the predatory grace of a man accustomed to getting his way. Clara's hand instinctively moved to her reticule, where her small derringer lay hidden. But Thomas caught the gesture and covered her hand with his own. "Trust me," he said quietly. "I won't let him hurt you." Harold reached them just as they stepped outside the church, his cold smile never wavering. "Clara, my dear stepdaughter," he said in the smooth, cultured voice that had once commanded respect in Philadelphia society. "How lovely you look. Marriage seems to agree with you." "Mr. Whitmore," Thomas said before Clara could respond, his voice carefully polite but with an underlying steel that made several nearby guests glance over curiously. "I'm Thomas Garrett, Clara's husband." "I wasn't aware that Clara had any family planning to attend our wedding." "Oh, it was a surprise," Harold replied smoothly, his pale eyes never leaving Clara's face. "I've been so worried about my dear stepdaughter since she left Philadelphia so suddenly. I simply had to come and make sure she was well." Clara found her voice at last, though it came out smaller than she would have liked. "I'm perfectly well, Harold. As you can see, I'm married now. There's no need for your concern." "Ah, but there is," Harold said, his smile taking on a sharper edge. "You see, my dear, there are certain legal matters that need to be resolved before your marriage can be considered valid. Debts that must be settled, documents that must be signed. I'm afraid you may have acted rather hastily in marrying without proper consultation." Thomas stepped slightly in front of Clara, his body language clearly protective. "What kind of legal matters?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Surely any debts belonging to Clara's family would have been settled before she left Philadelphia. Harold's laugh was cold and calculating. "Oh, my dear boy, you clearly don't understand the complexities of the situation. Clara left Philadelphia with certain obligations unfulfilled. As her legal guardian, I'm afraid I must insist that she return with me to settle these matters properly." "I'm not a child," Clara said, finding her courage at last. "I'm a married woman now, and you have no legal authority over me." "Actually," Harold said, producing a folded document from his coat pocket, "I'm afraid you're mistaken about that. This is a court order declaring you mentally incompetent due to your erratic behavior in recent months. As your legal guardian, I have the authority to make decisions about your welfare, including the annulment of any marriages entered into without proper consent." Clara felt the world tilt around her as Harold's words sank in. He had actually done it. He had convinced a judge to declare her mentally incompetent, just as he had threatened. In the eyes of the law, she was no better than a child, unable to make her own decisions or control her own life. "That's impossible," Thomas said, but Clara could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Clara is perfectly sane. Anyone can see that." "Can they?" Harold asked with mock concern. "A young woman who abandons her family, travels across the country alone, and marries a complete stranger? That hardly sounds like the behavior of a rational person. I'm afraid the court agreed with my assessment." Clara felt her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. All her hopes, all her dreams of freedom and partnership and love. Harold was going to destroy them all with a single piece of paper. She had been a fool to think she could escape him, a fool to think she could ever be truly free. "The marriage is legal," Thomas said firmly, though Clara could see the worry in his eyes. "It was performed by a priest, witnessed by the community. You can't just wave a piece of paper and make it disappear." "Actually, I can," Harold replied with satisfaction. "A marriage entered into by someone declared mentally incompetent is null and void. Clara will be returning to Philadelphia with me, where she will receive the proper medical care she so clearly needs." "No," Clara said, the word torn from her throat like a physical pain. "I won't go back. I won't let you lock me away." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice in the matter," Harold said, signaling to two men who had been standing nearby. Clara realized with growing horror that they were not wedding guests. They were Harold's hired men, probably the same type of thugs he used to collect gambling debts. "These gentlemen will escort you to the train station. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Thomas moved to block the men's path, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. "She's not going anywhere with you," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I don't care what your piece of paper says. Clara is my wife, and she stays here." Now," Harold said with false reasonableness, "let's not do anything rash. I understand you've grown fond of the girl, but surely you can see that she needs proper care, the kind of care that only a qualified medical facility can provide." Clara saw the doubt flickering in Thomas's eyes and felt her heart break. He was beginning to believe Harold's lies. beginning to question her sanity just as everyone else always did. After all, what did he really know about her? They had been married for less than an hour. Maybe Harold was right. Maybe she was crazy for thinking she could build a life with a man she barely knew. "Clara," Thomas said quietly, turning to look at her with those storm-gray eyes that had given her so much hope. "Tell me the truth. Are you running from something? Are you in some kind of trouble that I should know about?" This was it, the moment when she would lose everything. Clara could see it in Thomas's face, the growing uncertainty, the fear that he had made a terrible mistake. Harold had planted the seeds of doubt, and now they were taking root. She could tell Thomas the truth about Harold's gambling debts, about the threats and manipulation. But would he believe her? Or would he see her accusations as further proof of her instability? Clara began, then stopped as she saw the satisfaction in Harold's eyes. He was enjoying this, enjoying watching her world fall apart. And suddenly, Clara felt something shift inside her. She had spent so many years being afraid of Harold, letting him control her through fear and intimidation. But she wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She was Clara Garrett now, and she had a husband who had promised to stand beside her as an equal. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am running from something. I'm running from a man who tried to sell me to pay his gambling debts. I'm running from a stepfather who threatened to have me committed to an asylum when I refused to marry his choice of husband. I'm running from a life where I had no choices, no freedom, no hope for the future." She turned to face Harold directly, her chin raised defiantly. "And I'm not going back. I don't care what lies you've told or what papers you forged. I'm not going back to Philadelphia, and I'm not going to let you destroy the life I've built here." Harold's mask of false concern slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. "You ungrateful little bitch," he snarled. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By running off and embarrassing the family name?" "Everything you've done for me," Clara laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You mean like trying to force me into marriage with a man 3 times my age? Like threatening to have me locked away when I refused? Like stealing my inheritance to pay your gambling debts?" The crowd of wedding guests had grown quiet, sensing the tension and drama unfolding before them. Clara could see shock and sympathy on many faces as they began to understand the true nature of Harold's concern for her welfare. "Those are serious accusations," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. But Clara could see something changing in his expression, a hardening of resolve that gave her hope. "Do you have any proof of these claims?" "I have witnesses," Clara said, thinking of the servants who had seen Harold's rages. The creditors who had come to the house demanding payment. "I have letters from the men he tried to force me to marry. I have—" "The ravings of a disturbed mind," Harold interrupted smoothly. "Paranoid delusions are a common symptom of female hysteria. That's exactly why Clara needs proper medical supervision." "If Clara is so mentally unstable," Thomas said slowly, "then why did you wait until after her marriage to come forward with this court order? Surely a concerned guardian would have acted sooner to protect his ward." Harold's eyes flickered with annoyance at the question. "I only recently became aware of her whereabouts," he said. "As soon as I learned of her situation, I came immediately." "How did you learn of her whereabouts?" Thomas pressed. Clara was very careful to cover her tracks when she left Philadelphia. "I have my sources," Harold replied evasively. But Clara could see that Thomas's questions were making him uncomfortable. The important thing is that I'm here now to take Clara home where she belongs." "No," Thomas said firmly, and Clara felt a surge of relief and love so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. "Clara belongs here with me. She's my wife, and I'll be damned if I let you take her anywhere against her will." Harold's face darkened with rage. "You have no legal standing in this matter," he snapped. "Clara is mentally incompetent, which means her marriage is invalid. You're nothing but a stranger who took advantage of a disturbed woman." "Then prove it," Thomas challenged. "If Clara is truly mentally incompetent, it should be easy enough to demonstrate. Let's have a proper hearing with witnesses and evidence. Let the people of this community judge for themselves whether Clara is capable of making her own decisions." Clara held her breath as Harold considered this challenge. She could see him weighing his options, calculating the risks. A public hearing would expose his lies and manipulations to scrutiny, but refusing might make him look like the villain he truly was. "Very well," Harold said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But until such a hearing can be arranged, Clara will remain in my custody. I won't have her influenced by outside parties." "Like hell she will," Thomas said, his hand moving to his gun. "Clara stays with me, where she belongs." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife as the two men faced off, each determined to protect what they saw as theirs. Clara could see Harold's hired men moving closer, their hands hovering near their own weapons. The wedding guests were backing away, sensing that violence was about to erupt. And then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came the sound of approaching hoofbeats. A group of riders was approaching the church at a gallop, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized the lead rider. It was Sheriff Morrison, a man she had met briefly the day before, and who had seemed kind and fair. But sheriffs were bound to uphold the law, and if Harold's court order was legal, "Sheriff!" Harold called out with obvious relief. "Thank goodness you're here. I need your assistance in taking my mentally incompetent stepdaughter into protective custody." Sheriff Morrison dismounted and approached the group, his weathered face grave as he took in the scene. "Mr. Whitmore," he said with a nod, "I got your message about the situation, but I have to tell you, I've had some time to think about this, and I'm not sure I can help you the way you want." Harold's face went pale. "What do you mean? I have a legal court order." "Oh, I'm sure you do," the sheriff said dryly. "The question is whether it's worth the paper it's printed on. You see, I sent a telegram to Philadelphia this morning asking some questions about you and your guardianship of Miss Whitmore. The answers I got back were very interesting." Clara felt hope flaring in her chest as she saw the fear creeping into Harold's eyes. "What kind of answers?" Thomas asked. "Well," Sheriff Morrison said, pulling a telegram from his pocket, "it seems that Mr. Whitmore here has been having some financial difficulties lately. Gambling debts, mostly. And there are several warrants out for his arrest in connection with some questionable business dealings. Seems like he's been using his stepdaughter's inheritance to pay his debts, which is illegal, even if he is her guardian." Harold's face had gone from pale to ashen. Those are lies, malicious rumors spread by my enemies." "Maybe so," the sheriff said calmly. "But the fact remains that you're wanted for questioning in Philadelphia, which means I can't very well let you take anyone anywhere until we get this sorted out." Clara felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as she realized what was happening. Harold's lies were finally catching up with him, his crimes finally coming to light. She wasn't going back to Philadelphia. She wasn't going to be locked away in an asylum. She was free. "This is outrageous," Harold sputtered. "I demand—" "You're not in a position to demand anything," Sheriff Morrison said firmly. "In fact, I think you'd better come with me. We need to have a long talk about your activities in Philadelphia and your reasons for being here." As the sheriff's men moved to arrest Harold, he turned to Clara with a look of pure hatred. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll find a way to make you pay for this humiliation." "No," Clara said quietly, her voice steady and strong. "It is over, Harold. You have no power over me anymore. I'm not afraid of you, and I never will be again." As Harold was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and making threats, Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for years. She was truly free now, free to build the life she wanted with the man she loved. Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he never wanted to let her go. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry I doubted you, even for a moment. I should have trusted you from the beginning." "You did trust me," Clara said, looking up into his storm-gray eyes. "When it mattered most, you stood by me. You fought for me. That's all I ever wanted. Someone who would fight for me instead of against me." "Always," Thomas promised, his lips brushing against her forehead. "I'll always fight for you, Clara. You're my wife, my partner, my equal, and I love you more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Clara whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "I choose you, Thomas Garrett. Today and always I choose you." As they kissed there, in front of the church, surrounded by their friends and neighbors, Clara felt a sense of peace and belonging that she had never experienced before. She had found her home at last, not just in this beautiful land, but in the arms of the man who loved her for exactly who she was. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibility and promise. And Clara knew that whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. She had threatened to run if he kissed her, but Thomas had been right. He had made sure she never wanted to run again. She was exactly where she belonged.